Sis Nompumelelo, Ranji, as well as Ibrahim Fakir will be our respondents to this. We will proceed like having for each 10 minutes, and then after both the panelists would have had their 10 minutes, we shall afford our respondents each 10 minutes, and thereafter we shall then open up for comrades to engage by way of contributions, questions, which shall then be dealt with towards the end by both the panelists as well as our respondents. This is intended to be completed all together by 13:30, 1:30 this afternoon. So without much ado, perhaps what I could do now is just to do a bit of introduction without going into very elaborate, because their CVs are quite extensive. I will just highlight a few things, starting with Comrade Mavivi. Comrade Mavivi is a seasoned leader and cadre of the movement, having served different capacities, served the Umkhonto Wesizwe at a time, served the leadership of the ANC Women's League as deputy president at some point, represented the country in a number of stations as the ambassador in such countries as Namibia, being an advisor to the Minister on International Affairs, Derko, herself having led the ANC subcommittee at some point on international affairs. So she has been part of the negotiations process and very much really learned in this area of work. So her contribution here is going to be of critical, very vital to assist us to relate to the matter going forward. Comrade Andre Snell, equally been in Parliament since 1994, served different capacities, been Deputy Minister in the Department of COGTA, been Deputy Minister in the Department of Constitutional Development, and another citizen cadre of the movement, served different capacities from the ANC Youth League, in the legal fraternity, served different structures there. So equally comes across as very rich in terms of content that we have to deal with. Presently, coordinating the affairs of the National Working Committee at Luthuli House, part of the full-time contingent that we have there. Sis Ranji Nompumelelo is also another seasoned political analyst who comes very, very much learned in the sense that she has to herself a master's in the multidisciplinary human rights. She holds an honors degree in political science, as well as a degree on industrial sociology and labor studies. Has served in different capacities as a political analyst and researcher, served such structures as the Democratic Opportunity, where she published such work as whether South Africa needs an electoral reform. So on the matter we're discussing, she has really written widely. I can equally say with Ibrahim, he also has distinguished himself in a number of areas, been awarded Ruth First Fellowship by the University of Witwatersrand, and served a number of structures, ISA, as a researcher and analyst, IDASA, served different offices, in different offices, IDASA. Presently is based at the Owl Socioeconomic Research Institute. So we really have a very rich contingent of both our panelists as well as our respondents. The time now is almost like 11:39. I'll proceed without much ado. You've heard quite a voice, a male voice here. We'll start with a female voice of our presenters. I'll start with Sis Mavivi to afford her 10 minutes to actually present what she has presented us for us in this session. So without much ado, can I then call on Sis Mavivi to take the floor? Everyone is welcome, particularly the panelists, and I hope this will become yet another very exciting and interesting opportunity as we grapple with these difficult matters. Can I hand over to Sis Mavivi?
Thank you very much, Comrade Michauli. And thank you very much to Umrabulo, which were approached by Comrade Spanji to be part and parcel of this discussion. I must say also thank you to those who are listening and will be making their contribution after our presentation. Allow me, Chairperson, to say that I was requested to actually give a background. So the 10 minutes might be actually very long as to why in 1994, our elections was based on proportional representation. There have been lots of discussions which were taking place from the time we're in exile, and some of our comrades being in prison, and some of our comrades being in the mass democratic movement on what we envisaged as a post-apartheid South Africa. The most important thing at that time was to look at constitutional arrangements which will have, and also what policies will have in various aspects, education, health, etc. In order to deal with the constitution, a constitutional committee was established by President Oliver Tambo, which was headed by Comrade Zola Skweyiya, may her soul rest in peace. It was inevitable that this constitutional committee should also involve the women's section, the youth, and other alliance structures we had. And thus, when the ANC started rebuilding after the unbanning, the Constitutional Committee played a very important role in driving the negotiations. Various workshops were held where we studied electoral processes and also at the same time, the analysis of our situation in the country had to be also done. As we know that we're in a country at that time which was in conflict. And many of our people had never even voted. The question of poverty and uneven development informed some of the decisions of what electoral system we should adopt. Not only that, our negotiations started in 1991 under what was called Talks About Talks. And it was only in 1992 when a sitting which was called CODESA 1 began. And in the process, CODESA 2 also followed, which adopted a declaration of intent, and that declaration of intent outlined some of the issues which was to inform our electoral system. The most important, which I'll quote, is that all shall enjoy universality, that is, shall enjoy accepted human rights, freedoms, and civil liberties, including freedom of religion, speech, and assembly, protected by an entrenched and justiciable Bill of Rights and a legal system that guarantees equality for all before the law. Another important issue we adopted in the declaration was that there shall be a multi-party democracy with the right to form and join political parties, and with regular elections on the basis of a universal suffrage and on a common voters' roll. In general, the basic electoral system shall be that of a proportional representation. Within the ANC, we opted for this proportional representation in order to deal with the issue of inclusivity, participation of all South Africans, and to promote the participation of the many diverse groups and political traditions we had. So the issue of how these elections were going to take place and when also influenced our choice of a proportional representation system. As you know, that the election date was set in April 1993 after the brutal assassination of our leader, Comrade Chris Hani, which we were observing yesterday. May his soul rest in peace. It was after this brutal assassination that we went back to the Kempton Park negotiations and set the election date. At that time, we hardly actually had made agreements on the constitution, on the electoral system, which we're going to follow, and how it was going to look like. So we started working backwards in order to make sure that these elections take place. And what informed us that we should have this proportional representation system was the declaration of intent which was made at CODESA 2, that we didn't have this common voters roll at that time. We also had various conflicts in the country arising from apartheid colonialism and also the issue of illiteracy in terms of electoral systems also informed that. We are also very conscious that the majority of our people in the country are women and youth who also had to be accommodated in terms of the new democratic system, as we declared that we are going to have a united democratic, non-sexist, and also prosperous country. We're also informed, I think, by the Freedom Charter itself, where it said the people shall govern and all national groups shall have equal rights. Our country at that time was very divided in terms of nationalities. We had the 4 provinces. Located in those provinces was also divisions based on the Bantustan system, with some of this Bantustan system being given the so-called independence. And thus we had to look at what system will suit us. As I said, we visited various countries, we had workshops, and the ANC had adopted also a quota system, which allowed us to have 1/3 of those to be elected in the first democratic election were going to be women.
Can I interrupt?
Yes.
My apologies, Comrade Mavivi, my apologies. I'll just leave you with a minute to wind up. 10 minutes gets to be very fast. So just round up in a minute.
Thank you very much. And we also in 1992 had formed a patriotic front, which included 92 organizations. So we had to see what system will best also be able to accommodate in our list system, which was a party list based on this proportional representation, people who will be coming from this patriotic front. And thus proportional representation was the best system which we adopted. I'll stop there, and I think it will be good to take questions.
No, thank you very much, Comrade Mavivi. Thank you very much for sketching us really the background and situating us at the point where the ANC had to answer to this call, how to ensure inclusivity and the various dimensions you've referred to. I will not open yet for questions, but please stay put. Our comrades on Zoom and those who are watching on Facebook, there will be a consolidation of the questions coming, and we will be able to refer them to yourselves. Can I now ask Comrade Andries to likewise follow with his input in the same time? Comrade Andries.
Chairperson, thank you very, very much. And just to recognize my esteemed fellow panelists and all comrades who are participating, I think, in this very, very important and timely discussion. I'm going to present or just give an overview of the discussion document that has been prepared for the ANC National General Council on electoral systems and the building of a national democratic society. That document is publicly available. I would trust that many have read it. So I'm going to just try and give a synopsis and build on where Comrade Mavivi has left off with, I think, a very, very solid historical foundation that informs this debate and discussion. I think the first point to be made, which is made very, very strongly in the document, is that it's very easy when discussing electoral systems to lapse into a narrow, legalistic or technocratic discussion of what is essentially a very, very political matter that requires a holistic analysis, an all-round analysis that looks at the history of where we come from, but also subjects our society as it stands at the moment to a very, very thorough analysis, and then links the question of electoral systems and democracy to development and to the building of a national democratic society. And I think that finds expression in our foundational document, the Freedom Charter, that proclaims that the people shall govern, that talks about everyone being able to stand for political office. The ANC Constitution itself describes the ANC both as a national liberation movement, but also a political party that contests state power in order to advance a transformative agenda. The strategy and tactics of the ANC speak of democracy as a critical act of our national democratic revolution, the creation of a legitimate state, of regular elections and popular participation in governance. Similarly, the Constitution of the Republic, the foundation stone of our state, of our society, has as part of its founding provisions, universal adult suffrage, a common voters' roll, regular elections, and a multi-party system of governance. The National Development Plan, which guides all of our efforts, talks about and emphasizes the importance of active citizens and social activism. It makes the link between democracy and development and emphasizes the importance of the state acting with the people. And as a result, many, many participatory governance fora have been created: ward committees, school governing boards, community policing fora, clinic committees, etc. However, despite that emphasis on democracy and on participatory democracy, we do very worryingly see a growing distance between citizens and government. And that's manifest in violent protests, some around service deliveries, but also maybe at a more subjective level, the sense that communities are not being listened to. MISTRA, Mapungubi Institute for Social Reflection, has also pointed to non-participation in response to a general disillusionment with the politics of parties and government due to a decline in trust in political parties. The ANC Strategy and Tactics document refers to a disquiet that is growing in society, based on, at one level, on objective factors around the pace of social and economic transformation, but at another level, subjective factors such as leadership and the need to promote legitimate societal leadership and an active citizenry. Of course, all of these things need to be linked to the core tasks of the ANC, which revolve around the renewal of the organization, the consolidation of democracy, and speeding up programs of socio-economic transformation. We've also got to approach this discussion around electoral systems within an international context, and in particular, the crisis of neoliberalism, which has led to a declining legitimacy of our political systems and trust in political and business elites, and a rise of narrow nationalism and chauvinism. Electoral politics internationally is also challenged by a proliferation of fake news and in particular the manipulation of social media. Also the role of money, both in the selection of candidates and the conduct of election campaigns, has further served to create distrust and to delegitimize our politics. And I think lastly, all of this we need to discuss in the context of the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic, both on the holding of elections and election campaigns, but also the broader socioeconomic impact that the pandemic has had in exacerbating the already existing fault lines in our society. So, having said, given that broad background, the emphasis of the NGC discussion document is perhaps a little bit narrower and more modest, in that it focuses really on three main areas. Firstly, whether we should be introducing elements of a constituency-based electoral system, also at a national and a provincial level. Secondly, whether our national, provincial, and local government elections should be synchronized or harmonized and take place at the same time. And thirdly, the impact of the Constitutional Court judgment in the New Nation movement matter that has ruled that independent candidates should be allowed to contest elections at a national and a provincial level. Now, I think also to just say up front that the document doesn't take a clear position on these matters, yet it seeks to assist that all-rounded holistic analysis of these difficult and complex questions by teasing out some of the core issues that are required for a robust and a rigorous discussion. I think also to make the point that many of the challenges that we've outlined above can't be addressed simply by changing an electoral system. They must also be addressed through our developmental trajectory, looking at the balance of forces in society, the capacity of the developmental state, issues of governance, the selection and the conduct of public representatives, and in the case of the ANC, the role of our structures. So the point is made that this document, to be fully understood and to enrich the debate that is necessary, needs to be read in conjunction with a number of other NGC documents around the balance of forces, the building of the capacity of the developmental state, the revision of through the eye of the needle, documents around organizational renewal, and including also what were then proposals, now adopted, the rules for local government candidate selection. So, Chairperson, I see that I'm already standing at about 9 minutes. I hope that you will give me a little bit of injury time, maybe just to pick on some of the selected parts of the document. I think firstly, with regard to the Constitutional Court judgment on independent candidates, really there are three possible responses to that judgment, which has given Parliament 2 years to make provision for independent candidates to stand at a national and a provincial level. The first would be to say that we amend the Constitution to make it clear that Parliament can allow for independent candidates at a national and a provincial level, but is not obliged to do so. In other words, to bring national and provincial level in line with the situation that we have at a local level. The second would be to retain our existing electoral system, which is fundamentally a proportional representation system, and find some technical way of including individual independent candidates within that system by, for example, treating them as one-person parties. And lastly, it might be the open the door to embark upon a more widespread and fundamental reform of the electoral system, including amongst others the introduction of a constituency-based representation, which brings me to the next part of the document, which focuses exactly on constituency-based electoral system. Now, Comrade Mavivi has given the background to why, as South Africa, we've adopted proportional representation and why successive ANC national conferences have resolved to maintain that system. And it's really that it's a system that is easy, it is simple to administer, it's easy to understand by voters, and it gives a very, very accurate reflection of the sentiments, the electoral sentiments of society. It promotes diversity and inclusivity in our political life. Now, the argument has been raised that whilst it promotes representativity and inclusivity, it doesn't promote accountability, because it is argued there's not a direct nexus between voters and their representatives. And secondly, that representatives often end up being more accountable to their parties than to those who have elected them. However, I mean, there are arguments now. I would like to commend a paper by Professor Stephen Friedman titled The Systems Not to Blame, Electoral Systems, Power and Accountability, in which he makes the argument that context is very, very important, that these arguments are not as straightforward as they might appear, that the link between constituencies and accountability is not that straightforward, that the US, UK, India, Ghana, Zimbabwe, Kenya all use constituency systems with very, very different outcomes. So electoral systems don't necessarily guarantee certain outcomes. Secondly, he argues that...
Comrade Andres, you've asked for some minutes or two on injury time. Okay. I'll really spare you the last minute now. Unfortunately, you have to really try and deal with whatever is left of what you wanted to do in the Certainly. 2 minutes I'm affording you.
Thank you very much, Chair. I think all of this has brought the issue of the Van Zyl-Slabbert Commission's recommendations very, very much back onto the agenda. And the ANC, the NGC discussion document deals with the report in quite a great amount of detail. The last issue that the document raises is the so-called synchronization of elections. And it deals with a number of factors to consider in taking that decision. On the one hand, it points out that in favor of synchronizing elections, it can lead to savings of costs because of not having to hold elections on an almost continuous basis. And secondly, that it could strengthen initiatives like the district development model by having your public representatives at national, provincial, and local level all standing for office at the same time on a common mandate, thus promoting greater integration and coordination in government. On the other hand, it raises serious questions as to whether it will be to the advantage of our democracy to hold elections once in 5 years only, what impact that will have on the contact between government and voters. And secondly, it raises more technical concerns around the complexity of elections that could arise with many voters being confronted with many ballots at the same time. I think lastly, just to say is that what the NGC discussion document argues is that we need to look very, very critically at whatever electoral system we adopt, because it will impact very, very fundamentally on the kind of society that we build. And in that regard, we need to always remember the factors that Comrade Mavivi has raised. How will that electoral system impact on, for example, gender representativity? How will it impact on overall representativity in our society, including the national question? What will be the impact, for example, of introducing a geographic constituency-based system within a society that is still characterized by the legacy of apartheid spatial planning and political demarcations very often coinciding with ethnic and racial distributions of people. So, yes. Chairperson, thank you very much.
Yes, no, thank you, Comrade Andres. I'm afraid perhaps we need to think of other, I'm sure this is not just the only place in which this festival of ideas is meant to be facilitated. There would be other platforms as well. My apologies for cutting you short. I know you would have wanted to really park on some of the elements of this, but unfortunately because of time. You may say that the two reflect very much the internal thinking largely in the ANC. The reason why we thought it's important also to have those who may be seen and perceived to be coming with a very independent outside way of looking at the same phenomenon. That is why we have the composition as we have. If I may, because at the end we should really afford the engagement to take place. I will ask first Usis Nompumelelo to take the floor and make a response to what we have already heard, and of course also any other critical views out there on the same matter. Can I invite Ms. Ranji? Please unmute, ma'am.
Okay, there we go. Sorry. I was struggling with the permission to unmute myself. Good afternoon. Yes, it's afternoon. Good afternoon to my esteemed panelists and to all participants in this discussion this afternoon. I just want to firstly begin by saying that, you know, whenever we have a discussion about reforming anything, we need to ask ourselves to what end, what are we trying to achieve? You know, what problem are we trying to solve? What question are we trying to answer? And when I started doing this work, leading a research project at the Forum for Public Dialogue, the question that seemed to be top of mind, particularly amongst opposition leaders, particularly in the DA and then leader of Ahang, Dr. Mampela Rampele, the question was around accountability. And it seems that that is a backdrop against which this conversation always goes. Proportional representation is a great electoral system. However, it does not afford us the ability to hold public representatives accountable. That's what you know, normally comes out of these discussions. Accountability, particularly the distance and the weak link between society, particularly citizens and elected representatives. So then electoral reform is then touted almost like a silver bullet, you know, to solve this problem. And I tend to be of the opinion that there are many other things. I tend to agree with part of the reflections that have already been made, that there's a lot more to consider. So accountability is an important value and virtue in a democracy, but it's not the only important value and virtue. Among others are inclusion, fairness, representation, participation, access. So electoral reform can't only be about promoting one value, which is accountability. We've got to consider how it is that it will impact on the other values that we are trying to inculcate in our society. I think the other important conversation that needs to be had in our country is we need to be having a conversation about how political parties are disproportionately empowered to decide on the destiny and future of society. Excuse me. And I think that is what the Constitutional Court challenge around independent candidates was trying to address, the extent to which political parties have the power to decide. So you have to be a member of a political party and then work your way up the structures, get elected or get selected, get appointed, and then to be able to stand. So, so not many citizens are necessarily card-carrying members of political parties. Of course, they're avid supporters, but to what extent are their voices heard in the decision-making processes in terms of the contestation of ideas, the contest of ideas in our society? So we need to be asking, how do we ensure and improve access, inclusion, participation by citizens in decisions that affect them? It's not just a question of elections, it's a question of the design of our political system and the kinds of institution building we undertake, you know, and we're doing. There's already been obviously a mention of the fact that we have those social and community protests, whether we call them service delivery protests or others. But really, these protests, research has shown, much research has shown that these protests are actually led by young people. And so it proves that, you know, it invalidates the point that says young people are apathetic. Young people are very active, but they somehow feel that the current modalities for participation are alienating, and they are disillusioned. When I did some work in 2019 under my Open Society Foundation Democracy Fellowship, I did some focus groups with young people in Gauteng, in Tshwane, Ekurhuleni, as well as the city of Joburg. And what really came out very strongly is that young people are experimenting with different ways of being heard. So when we look at even the Fees Must Fall and other forms of student activism over and above the other examples of social and community protests that we've seen, we are seeing that it's an experimentation with different ways of participation and gaining access to decision makers and participating in decision making. You know, we say a lot about the accessibility of proportional representation system as well. This is just another point. When Youth Lab did some work, Youth Lab is an organization that works with young people. They did some work in terms of interviewing young people across the country, across the 9 provinces, with regards to you know, their intended participation in 2019 general elections. And they found that a lot of young people don't actually understand our proportional representation system. So this notion that it's simple and accessible and people understand it, and so we don't have to do as much investment in education, has really been proven otherwise. There are young people who actually just genuinely don't understand what they're voting for, that they're actually voting for parties, they're not voting for individual candidates, that they actually don't vote for the president. It's actually parliament that actually votes the president into power. And so there's a lot to be said also about the extent to which the current system is as accessible. And when we now want to go into more complex considerations around constituency-based systems and constituencies, cutting up constituencies and mixed systems, etc., to what extent are we going to be able to explain that to the electorate? So we need to we shouldn't isolate the debates on elections from other important discourses, and I think the discussion document touches on this. We need to ask what kind of political culture we're seeking to engender, and what about power in its different forms? What about power in its different forms, and dimensions, and the influence on elections and electoral and political outcomes? So it's not only the vote and the public and the electorate going to the ballot box. We've had a long debate about party funding in this country, and we've got the new Party Funding Act. But we know about the disparities in South African society, which means that people with money or people with influence have greater access to elected representatives and politicians than those who don't. So in a comparative study on electoral systems that I led at the Forum for Public Dialogue, looking at the same countries that Professor Friedman mentions in his paper, Ghana, Kenya, India, UK, Germany, US, Zimbabwe, there are a couple of things that we highlighted in that work, as well as in my book, Does South Africa, The Democratic Opportunity, Does South Africa Need Electoral Reform? Some of the considerations, I'm going to just go through them quickly. There are 10 considerations that I think that we need to make during a discussion on electoral reform. The first one is that came out of the study was that the need to establish standards of merit. In Kenya, in the 2013 elections, MPs had to have a certain level of education. That's how they were trying to ensure that they had qualified people actually running for elected office. I know the Eastern Cape, ANC provincial leadership in the Eastern Cape recently said something about sending prospective councillors to the O.R. Tambo School of Leadership, for instance, trying to deal with this question of how are leaders equipped, to enter public office. The second thing is we need to deal with the question of civic and political education. It has to be intentional, and we have to establish, we need to, like I said, back to the question of political culture. It can't just be left to be arbitrary. We need to be intentional about teaching our citizenry about our political culture and that is required for the kind of democracy that we're trying to build and to strengthen good governance. One of the principles being accountability, of course. So we need an electorate that can demand accountability, that does demand accountability, but they need to have a good knowledge of the system, the political system, our constitution, etc. It's really not just about the electoral system. The third thing is ensuring public scrutiny on political parties through allowing for public participation, such as the primaries in the US, and allowing for public debates between party candidates. That tries to solve part of the problem about giving political parties actually having a disproportionate say in terms of the discourses and ideas on how the kind of society we're trying to build and the decisions and the policies, is how do we add more public scrutiny to those processes, and how do we improve access and participation and inclusion, not just at the level of the electoral system, but participation within political parties as well, and across society. Also, we need a political system which is not just about which is more about a contest of ideas rather than a preoccupation with personalities. That was something that also came out. So the constituency-based system is not going to be a silver bullet to accountability problems or any other problems. We need to have a situation where personality politics is less poignant than a discussion of political ideas. And we found in the research that personality politics encourages patronage and clientelism, and leaders are incentivized to use public resources to buy their popularity. And that speaks to the point around party funding. For instance, in Germany, party funding is strictly regulated. And so when we had conversations with some of the people at the embassy, we're talking about in Germany, you don't have to be a billionaire or a multimillionaire to run for elections. Anybody can actually run for elections because the process is insulated from this vote buying and money and all of that. Unlike in the US elections, where money really means a lot, and even here in South Africa. And then the other points that we raise is that our politics has become too litigious, meaning that there's too much running to the courts, which is also another sign that we are way off from entrenching the kind of democratic political culture that would help us to resolve, help political parties and representatives to resolve their issues. I'm running through the points. I think I've got 3 more to go. And then the 8th thing was, if we want to promote, another way of promoting accountability could be allowing Parliament to approve cabinet appointments, such as is now the practice in Kenya, which is provided for in the 2010 Constitution, which is actually was used in the most recent elections. And then another important thing was thinking about adding a recall provision that enables citizens to recall underperforming public representatives, such as MPs. The Kenyan Constitution, the 2010 Constitution has provided for this, and there are some states in the US that also provide for this at state level, the recall of public representatives. And there are different modalities for this. A lot of them involve the signing and writing up and signing of petitions, and it has to be a certain number of people who sign on to the petition, then it goes through another process, but we'd have to think about modalities. And the last point is that we really need to think about the opposition and the need for a stronger opposition that appeals broadly. And as we did this work, part of the historical research, that's been done by other organizations, shows that, supporters of political parties in this country view political parties as inclusive. They view their political parties as inclusive. But those who sit on the outside of those parties, who are not members or supporters of those parties, view the parties as being exclusive. So there's something to be said about our parties trying their best to have a broader appeal. It can't just be about personalities. And the last point that I shouldn't forget is
yes, Ms. Ranji, last point.
The last point that I shouldn't forget is this is something that I think is a very important point to be made. Political party constitutions and the extent to which they actually align with the country's constitution. I mean, we've got political parties that have leaders that can have 3, 4, 5, 6 terms, whereas the constitution, has a term limit. So to what extent, in terms of promoting internal party democracy and ensuring that we're inculcating that democratic political culture, to what extent should political party constitutions be regulated to the extent that they should be in alignment with the country's constitution and the values that we're trying to promote in our constitution? So I'm going to leave it there. Thank you so much.
No, thank you, Ms. Ranji. Thank you very much, Ms. Ranji. I will without further ado, invite Ibrahim to take the floor. I'm sure he's the only one today who's going to disappoint me by not causing me to have to ask him to stop. Thank you very much, Ibrahim.
Thank you very much, Chair, and thank you for this very kind invitation to me to join this discussion. You will notice that I made sure that I wore something neutral. I mean, neither blue nor red. So, I'm not wearing the colors of any coalition. Regardless, Chair, I'm going to focus my response in 3 different areas. First, political, secondly, theoretical, and thirdly, systemic. And I want to begin by saying that in being political, I think when we think about the rethinking of the electoral system, we must rethink the idea of CST as well. So the idea of colonialism of a special type, inherited as it was from 1969, may in fact no longer be appropriate for the way in which we understand society, because there are 2 key postulates which somehow seem to be contestable. The first is that the colonizer and the colonized occupy the same geographic space. Our constitution and the Freedom Charter itself now dispenses with that problem. Everyone who lives in the country, belongs in it, right? So the idea of the duality of inclusion, exclusion is dispensed with. The second is that there are no necessary and inherent antagonisms amongst two groups, amongst blacks generally, and that is no longer true. We now do have those antagonisms, and fairly deeply as such. So the idea, historical as the current electoral system was, to promote inclusivity, to promote groups to be able to participate, to ensure this diversity, though they may still be necessary, are not as necessary either for the ANC or for the society as a whole. So with that as a background, thinking that the idea of CST may no longer be appropriate or sufficient for understanding where we are as a society might lead us to rethink the values by which we think of the electoral system. Because all of the panelists have said, look, the electoral system as a system can't necessarily itself solve all of our problems, and that's true. So what we need to try and do is strike a balance between what I would say 3 core sets of principles with 12 values. And those 3 sorts of principles, I group them as follows. The first is the group of democracy and representation. And here we're thinking of values such as inclusivity, diversity, representativity, and fairness, right? So if you think of that group, and they all fall under the rubric of democracy and representation, and there's 4 principles. The second group is agency and functionality. So this is the ability of citizens to exercise agency to a maximum extent. Participation, the ability to give voice, and the ability to exercise choice, and the system that facilitates all this must be fairly simple and understandable, not just for citizens to be able to exercise their voice, choice, and participation, but also for the election manager to be able to manage the system by which this is facilitated. So that's the second broad group. The third broad group is the question of structure and governance. And here we're thinking about the balance between accountability that all of my colleagues have spoken about. But I think we must add the question not just of accountability, but of oversight and of responsiveness. And the reason why I think oversight and responsiveness are important is because they bring together the different dimensions of accountability. We often think of accountability only when or some people think of accountability only as the relationship between the legislature and the executive. Other people think of accountability only in the sense that the public representative must be accountable to a community or a constituency. But that's not necessarily the case. There are multiple dimensions to accountability, and I think the responsiveness and oversight dimensions have largely been ignored, and we need to seriously consider how in any new system those can be accommodated. So what I'm arguing for, what I'm suggesting, is that we need to think about these 3 broad sets of principles with the 12 values attached under them. So if that's the case, and Comrade Andries Nel is talking about the fact that, look, there are 3 options which we agree with. You can either go the minimalist approach, given the Constitutional Court ruling now, and the minimalist approach would be to simply amend the Constitution in one of 2 ways. A, to insist, as he says, that proportionality does not have to include the fact that individuals can participate. The second option is to allow the current system as is and to simply add on the fact that individuals can participate as individuals and will be considered as parties. I would think it would be a pity if that is the approach that is adopted, because I genuinely think that this is a moment in a societal history, given that we're 25 years into the transition and away from where we were. It is a moment in which we can rethink and reimagine where we are and what we can do. And this must be thought in conjunction with all of the debates that have been had about the nature of the state and the structure of the state, the size of the provinces, the number of the provinces, and all of these have all been discussed at a whole range of previous ANC conferences. But I would think that this is a moment in which to be bold and to try and devise a system which is going to balance all of these 12 values according to the group of 3 principles. In that sense, many of the proposals which do appear to be made in the NGC document which has been circulated and which I've had a look at is saying quite clearly that the one option is to take the minimalist approach and simply add on the fact, now that the court has said so, we will simply add on the fact that individuals or independents can participate. Second option is to have some kind of mixed system, as was suggested by the Van Zyl-Slabbert Commission and has now been reiterated by the Inclusive Society Institute. I was part of the panel of that institute and had to go along with the majority recommendation, which was the idea of a mixed system. I did, however, have a minority view, which was not very popular, but may gain some traction. And the toss-up here, judging from the conversation that we've been having and from the systems which are spoken about in the NGC document, is that the mixed system may be able to provide better geographic constituency responsiveness, what Nompumelelo is calling accountability. And perhaps that in part is true, but our local government system, a pure mix as it is showing that geographic constituency elections do not necessarily lead to better responsiveness because people extract responsiveness in all kinds of other ways. But the question for me is that lack of responsiveness because of the nature of the system, or is it because of the nature of the political culture and the kind of impunity which has been allowed to fester over time? And that impunity, unfortunately, has been aided by a pure proportional representation system. It would be unarguable to suggest that people who are elected purely on the basis of a party list or who are dependent on re-election on the party, that they will exercise an independence of mind. So the reason why this culture of impunity and unaccountability and unresponsiveness has been allowed to fester over the last little while is partly because of the nature of the overweening nature of the proportional system. Now, I agree that the proportional system has major merits. The inclusivity, representativity, and diversity issues matter, and they matter a great deal for a society like ours. But I do think that if we insist that those are the only values that we think about, and we don't think about the governance values of responsiveness, oversight, and a degree of accountability, not just between legislature and executive, but between public representative and community and constituency, that the constituency system would be a very necessary inclusion in any new system. The question then would be about what is the nature of the constituency system that is brought in. Would it be a multi-member constituencies as it envisaged by the Van Zyl-Slabbert report or the Inclusive Society Institute proposal now, which is multiple member constituencies where multiple people would be representing people in a very big constituency? I have two problems with that. The first is that the size of those constituencies will be very big and won't necessarily engender the accountability and responsiveness issues. The second is that it's very easy when you have multiple members elected in a constituency for one member or the other to shirk responsibility and pass it on. To say, no, it wasn't me, it was the other guy. Or it wasn't the other guy, it was the other lady. So the shirking of responsibility, the size of constituencies is far too big. I personally would prefer to go for single member constituencies. The problem with that is that the size of the constituencies would have to matter, and all of the considerations that we want to think about in terms of non-racialism, in terms of solidarity between different cleavages, whether it be race, age, gender, class, whatever, can be addressed by sophisticated geographic information systems in which the size of the constituencies are kept firstly manageable so that there is some geographic responsiveness between elected representative and community. And the second is that the constituency is drawn in such a way, not only that it is geographically manageable, but that it is sufficiently diverse in the way in which it's drawn up. from historically, spatially white group areas, mixed areas, with township areas, different class configurations. And, if we have proper records, as we should have at the demarcation board and a sophisticated GIS system, there's no reason why this can't be adequately addressed and encapsulated. So my argument would be, Chair, to go for a mixed system, but not the mixed system that most people are talking about now. Unfortunately, the proposal I make would require a constitutional amendment. Now, if Comrade Andre says that you can amend the constitution to say that the proportional representation system does not necessarily have to include the fact that individuals can participate, then why not amend section 46(1) to say it doesn't necessarily have to result in proportional representation, but that we must have an element of proportionality, because we understand that the proportionality advantages are still necessary in a society like ours. So, and I would be happy to explicate on a broader proposal of what I mean when I talk about a mixed system, not in the current mix that most proposals make. I am not talking about a mixed system in principle. I'm talking about a hybrid system with two parallel forms existing. The one is pure constituency representation topped up with a proportional list, which would be slightly shorter, and that addresses all of the 12 values that I spoke about with the 3 groups of principles. On the last point, and I'm not going to be long.
Yes, yes, that should be your last.
My last point is on the question of harmonization. I don't think harmonization is a good idea, because the question that it would save money is true, but it is true for a very small proportion. The question is that it creates incredible complexities for election administration and management. The cost saving is not that big. It reduces the number of times at which citizens come out to be together, because that's what elections are. You come out, you be together, you promote a sense of solidarity, you are all collectively doing something. And reducing the number of times which you do that is not good for a democracy. And secondly, all the issues get fudged. National issues get fudged with local issues. There's no distinctiveness. And lastly, some parties are entirely reliant on the proportional representation system for representation. Because if you have any move towards geographic systems, they start to disappear. But we should ask ourselves the question, is the proliferation of as many parties as we currently have serving the nature of the democratic governance edifice that we want? And finally, my last point, congratulations that the ANC is starting to talk about this. I'm shocked that parties haven't made any proposals, given that we're already a year after the Constitutional Court judgment. Thank you very much.
No, thank you very much. Thank you very much. Surely 10 minutes is a very small, limited amount of time to actually tease such a very deep matters. I really think both the presenters, our panelists, including the respondents, I really should thank them for trying that hard task. And I think they did exceedingly very well. Because to the extent they have really exposed a number of important variants to this is really highly appreciated. I am doing this on behalf of all of us, so that when you have the time to speak, you just take the thanking of the presenters and the respondents as having been dealt with. We don't have near enough time, as you have seen. I have a very tight ship to really make sail until 1:30. By that time, we should have gone back to our presenters. Normally, we have, through the show of hands, people raising their hands through the system to make very brief comments and questions. I think if we could, and that we will also take the others, perhaps that may be transmitted to myself, that either on the other platforms are being comments made that may need our presenters or respondents to actually deal with. Can I, at this point, say we are at that time where the floor is open for us to participate within such constraints? But surely this is just enabling that the debates go on in our structures, in our communities, as we are preparing towards the National General Council. I see in the system there are already some hands. Can I note Comrade Eric Katsana? That's the hand I have now. Can we start with you, Comrade Eric?
Okay. Thank you, Comrade. I thank for the opportunity. I'm going to start with my comment. I'm going to try to be 30 seconds. My comment is that I like the fact that we mentioned the essence of accountability and the essence of appraisal leadership, and highlighting the fact that once one is accountable, can be able to understand what society needs. So the essence of accountability brings along a leader that knows what the people need when he's taken in, or when he's given the essence of being into control of a certain caliber or something. My question is this one. How can we ensure that we bring back the confidence of the people, more especially in small communities, the essence of accountability? I wanted to stick to that because that was one of the things that stuck out for me today. How can we ensure that when we go back to the community, we ensure that the ANC remains accountability to those that will lead them? So how can we ensure that accountability is an essence to society to believe and have trust back in us in such a way that they would be able to understand that whatever we do, we account at all spheres? Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Comrade Eric. From where I sit, unless advised, I don't see any other hand that's been raised. Can I just as well say that the topic, the focus is on the electoral systems for a democratic society that we are building, which we were pointed to that we've just celebrated 25 years. I'm sure the question would be, does the electoral system as we have hold any good? Does it need a review? If yes, what kind of review is needed? There's, of course, the issue of the Concord. There's been the wider principles that have been defined here. I think crucial to us going forward is exactly responding to that question, the adequacy or not of the current electoral system. I see Comrade Lowe, the co-host, has his hand up. Comrade Lowe.
Yes, Chair. I just thought I should perhaps just pick for you some of the comments coming from Facebook, if that's okay.
Please do.
Okay. We have one from Greg Makati, who really makes 3 comments. Says that I think that synchronization of elections would be useful and effective decision. Then continues to say that accountability trumps most. It is upon the party and elected official to promote accountability to the effect of teaching the constituents their rights and making sure that the officials are meeting the required standard and expectation. One more comment from Craig Makati. Participation with political parties is vanishing due to gatekeeping, corruption, and the use of public funds to keep officials in office needs to be dealt with. Then there is Stephanie Kem, who says that accountability is fundamental and sadly absent now. Without it, people will go away and inclusivity will go too. Comrade Stephanie also continues by saying, apartheid had constituency-based elections. Form is not a panacea. There's another comment from Radina Lady, Patrick Musiani. I've tried to summarize this because it was a bit lengthy, but let me try. As regard the matter of synchronized electoral system, it is not only the 2 issues raised by the speaker which are a challenge. True, too much voting paperwork may confuse too much voting paperwork may confuse voters, but essentially we do not seem to be clear what challenge we seek to overcome. A cost-benefit analysis can show that the reduction of cost during election is really minuscule in comparison to the constitutional statewide institutional reconfiguration. Then Joe Mavuso in the chat group here, Comrade Joe was saying that democracy is in a state of perpetual crisis and there will always be a struggle to find better forms of representation and accountability. There is a need to explore complementary elements of participation and accountability that will be relevant for South Africa. It is the means for legitimizing leaders. That's that, Chair.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for that. That seems strangely to be the only questions that we have so far. And looking through those who have enrolled here with us, I don't see any hands or desire to engage. Yes, Prof. Mayatula is there.
Yeah. And also, Chairperson, sorry, I see here Chris Hendricks, it says that he's raising his hand physically, probably challenged by the gadget. So maybe we could also—
All right, thank you. Thank you. I'll start with Comrade Prof. Mayatula, then Comrade Hendrick will follow. Prof.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Thank you, Chair. Now, I wanted to draw your attention to Comrade Chris. Am I muted?
I do hear you. I do hear you.
Yes. No, I just wanted to draw. And there's also a Comrade Wilfred Mgudle. He has been speaking a long time. I don't know whether he's aware that he's muted, but he has been speaking and speaking and speaking. Comrade Wilfred Mgudle. I just wanted to alert you to those.
No, thank you, Ngosh. Thank you, Ngosh. Comrade Hendrick, and then I see Comrade Mahati will then follow. Comrade Hendrick. Well, I don't seem to have any response there.
Yeah, Comrade Hendrick is to unmute, Chair.
Okay.
Yeah, Comrade Chair, here I am.
All right, proceed.
You have me. All ears.
We hear you. We hear you, yeah. Yes.
Comrade Chair, I have a few comments. And whether we have proportional representation or, as one speaker has mentioned, a mixed system. Personally, I think what is very important for us to understand that in all this, what is most important is that we include inclusivity and that we have accountability and access to the representatives that will be there. And in our electoral system, it's important that, as the one speaker has said, Nompulo, that civic education is important. That we have had through the South African Council of Churches with the Electoral Commission, that our people are once again politically educated and that they partake in the democratic system that we have, so that they know and understand the representation, the democracy, and accountability, so that the individuals that are representing us are responsible and accountable to us as voters. That is very important for us as a basic thing. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Comrade Chris. Comrade Mahati. Comrade Mahati.
Yeah, no, thanks a lot. And let me also welcome the presentations by the panelists, but also make a point before I ask a question that indeed, I think this is a necessary discussion. because it adds to, in my view, to the strengthening and the deepening of our democracy. And I think it's a necessary discussion to have. My only question is, well, of course, there are options which are outlined, and personally, I'm very much comfortable with an option of a hybrid, wherein you'll have, if in the case National Assembly, for instance, 200 members, constituency-based, 200 proportional. But my question will be, what are other legislations which will be affected by this amendment? For instance, the political party funding legislation, how do we bring it now that we have individuals as independent candidates? But that's only my question. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Comrade Lemako.
Okay. Oh, thank you, Comrade, for allowing me this opportunity, and thank you to all the presenters who presented this valuable information. My input will be that we, the ANC, as the party, political party, we must make sure that we make our representatives to be accountable to the party so that they can be accountable to the people whom are the voters. So if we can instill that responsibility and respect so that our people understand that they are not representing themselves, even the system, it can be, yes, the proportional representatives that it is in place for benefiting many people in terms of multiple representation. But we must make sure that those who are representing people, they account. The systems will be changed in different ways, but the important thing is to make those who are in power to account to the voters so that at the end of the day, the democracy is deepening, whereby the people's will is taking place by the participants themselves so that they can own the outcomes of whatever is happening on the ground in terms of their own development. So that's my input, but we must make sure that the parties, the organization must make sure that it have the systems in place to monitor and evaluate its representatives in terms of adhering to good governance so that we realize democracy and liberation that we want. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Comrade Lemako. I'm tempted now to go back to our presenters to make their comments, and I would even say, given that I don't have any other hand up, and that those who were commenting on the other platforms, theirs had been relayed. Let's start again with Usis Mavivi to maybe have her comments now, and can we confine it to 3 minutes? Just before that, Comrade Tumelo. Comrade Tumelo? I don't know what's happening with Comrade Tumelo. It looks like he wanted to make a point before I go to the panelists. We seem to have lost Comrade Tumelo. Can I then take Usis Mavivi?
Am I, sorry.
Are you back, Tumelo?
Yes.
Proceed with your point.
Okay, thank you very much. Am I audible?
Proceed, Comrade Tumelo.
Okay, yes, with the, there is an element of neoliberalism. Kwame Nkrumah's book titled The Neocolonialism, the last stage of imperialism. I mean, I think with the voters nowadays, they have to be. I know that the power, the voters have the power in their hands, but they don't realize that they have it. So, with the type of model that is now at play, which is authoritarian, I think the people must have that power to vote and to vote for people that they want in power, and the executive, to hold the executive in account. So I just want to say that they must be aware that they have power. That's my 2% contribution. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Comrade Tumelo. Thank you very much. Can I then take Usis Maveve?
Thank you very much, Chair. From the questions and the comments which are made, there's no direct question to me. But I would like to say that the Constitutional Court ruling is what we must now operationalize and maybe focus on in terms of the issues which have been raised on the issue of responsiveness, accountability, and inclusivity. I think we have experience from local government where we have the ward system and also the proportional representation party lists. And what we have discovered and our experience actually is that we cannot, like we do at the present moment with the provinces and the national parliament, be able to have some of these principles which have been outlined here. I remember in one local government, we had to sit the whole night going through the ward representatives, which were mainly male and had no representation in terms of the people from the Patriotic Front, the Alliance, the women, the youth, and it took us a long time to try and change what already was discussed and the nomination from the wards. So changing the system which we have at the moment of proportional representation, it's going to affect that. Not only that, it's also going to affect the small parties which are represented in parliament, because we're able to set a threshold as to how many votes they should have in order to be part and parcel of the parliament. And I think this is what has brought peace to our country, where even the smallest party is represented. With the new system which we had to deal with, I think we should take those issues into consideration. I know the issue of party representation, gatekeeping, and the fact that the voters don't feel the people who are elected through the party system are accountable, despite the fact that they establish offices in various areas. I think even with local government, I would like to know how many people have been able from the ward system being accountable, and whether the voters have been able to remove them if they are not accountable to them. And thus, I would like to say clearly, there's a lot to be considered. Accountability cannot only be established by having independence or constituency-based election. We should have our focus on how this can happen. I don't know if people have seen the DRC ballot paper, which consists of many, many pages. And I see actually on our participants who are here, Comrade Vali Musa, who is heading a committee, which already is appointed by Home Affairs to try and look into the implementation of the Constitutional Court ruling. Maybe you should say something too on this issue as to how far they are and what is expected from us as political parties. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Comrade Maveve. Can I invite now Comrade Andres, and I hope Comrade Andres can also speak to the potential constitutional impacts by way of certain, if we take this or that decision, how it would impact the Constitution and the need of some amendments. Very much without talking to what you want to say, you have your 3 minutes as well.
Thank you very much, Chair. The 3 minutes is indeed a tall order, so my apologies if I don't respond to questions or comments individually.
Okay.
Second, I think first of all, just to welcome all inputs, both from participants as well as fellow panelists. I just want to start off by the input by Ibrahim Fakir, in that I agree with him that this indeed 25 years into democracy, having a major constitutional court judgment impacting on our electoral system, it indeed does provide a moment for penetrating reflection and a moment to be bold. And I think it calls upon the ANC also to show leadership and thought leadership. And I think it's in this context that we're having this discussion, and that would feed into some of the processes that have been initiated in government. And I'm very happy that the chairperson of the Ministerial Advisory Committee, Vali Musa, is here. Having said that, I do think that as we proceed to be bold, we need to be bold in a very rigorous and thoughtful manner. And I mean, I would just like to take issue with him. This is not the time or the place to debate the merits and the demerits of colonialism of a special type. But I would be a little bit less sanguine in dismissing CST, in that I think many of the fault lines that colonialism of a special type describes are still very, very much with us. And to too quickly dismiss that, I think, can lead us into a number of very, very serious mistakes that will which will cause us, which will risk us setting back our democratic gains. And I think it's in that context also that I would take issue with the introduction of a geographic constituency-based system that displaces the current constitutional adherence to the basic principle that our elections must result in proportionality. Because that will have a major impact on the fault lines of gender, of race, of class, of urban, rural, and other divides. So I think those are things that we need to think through very, very carefully. I think Nompumelelo Runji has delivered a very, very useful input, and I think that many of the ideas that she comes up with are designed exactly to enhance exactly accountability, accessibility, inclusivity in ways that don't necessarily require a change to the electoral system itself. And I think it's important that we further explore all of those suggestions that she's made around standards of merit, the importance of civic and political education, issues around party funding, involvement, popular participation in political parties. And I think many of those ideas have already been discussed and resolved upon at ANC conferences or are currently under discussion. So I think that does enrich these debates. I think maybe just lastly to say that a lot of this discussion has centered around accountability. And I think there are a number of interventions that can be made to promote that accountability. I mean, one would lie at the level of the process that parties go through in terms of the selection of their candidates. The fact that the ANC for the forthcoming local government elections has adopted candidate selection processes and criteria that really put an emphasis on community involvement in the selection of candidates and take us quite close to what would in other jurisdictions be regarded as primaries. I think secondly, mechanisms like the ability to recall are things to consider very carefully. But I also just want to problematize notions of accountability a little bit, in that I think we need to discuss them in conjunction with the ways in which our system of government functions. Very often, for example, local government councillors, ward councillors, are expected to be accountable for things that ultimately they have very, very little control over, because the powers and functions relating to those matters often lie in other spheres of government, national and provincial. And therefore, I think the debates around how we strengthen our developmental state, how we strengthen things like the district development model, bringing those three spheres of government together, are also integral to promoting accountability and responsiveness of our public representatives. But Chairperson, I think then just to thank all of the participants for really, really thought-provoking ideas that I think will go a long, long way to enriching this document as we go forward to the National General Council and the policy conference, and ultimately our next national conference. Thanks.
Well, thank you very much, Comrade Andres. There has been, and again, I've noted that Comrade Valley is here. I don't want him to feel compelled to say something, but if without any constraint, he could make a few remarks, I think that would be in order. Comrade Valley.
I'm trying to open my sound. Can you hear me?
Yes, loud and clear.
Comrade Pumulo and Chairperson, thank you very much. As you rightfully said, I have no intention of speaking at all. I just wanted to listen to what was being said. You caught me a little bit off guard. I thought you would reject that suggestion from Comrade Mavivi. But just to say that the committee has been established not a very long time ago, and it has started its work. It held a full day of stakeholder engagement, listening to different views on the electoral systems and such things. And then, as you would know, that the National Assembly also held a workshop on this question, which I attended, and they asked me to address the matter. And so what I'm doing here is just listening, because I think we're still at the phase of listening to people. I must just tell you, though, Chairperson, that the Constitutional Court has given Parliament 24 months within which to amend the Electoral Act. And that 24 months started, I think, somewhere around June 2020. So in other words, by June 2022, Parliament should have amended the Act. In other words, it should have voted on it already and amended the Act, and it should be before the President so that he could assent to it in order to meet the requirements of the Constitutional Court. The kind of time frame that I'm working on is that at a push, Parliament will need about 12 months to process the legislation. In other words, from June 2020, it should start processing the legislation because Parliament has its own rules. And if they truncate some of the rules, they should be able to do it within that time. So the ideal thing is if my committee puts forward its proposals by June this year or slightly before that. So just to give an idea of the timeframes you're working on, it's not that tight. It would appear as though it's an inordinate amount of time. But I must tell you, Chair, I don't think, I mean, it would appear as though it's a very short time, but I don't think it's a very short time because this matter has been debated in society for the past 20 to 25 years. And so there's a lot of thought, a lot of debate that has already gone on. It's not like we're starting right now. The thing that we've been trying to collect are what are the principles that are important in South African society, and listening to what everybody has said here, I think there's very little debate on what are the principles on which an electoral system should be based. National unity, non-racialism, promotion of gender equality, direct representation, all of those sorts of principles. So I think I'm happy that there's not much debate on the principles itself, and even where people are putting forward different electoral systems, nobody's really saying that we're going to go to war on this or that. During the CODESA days and the multi-party negotiations, Comrade Mavivi would remember, there were people who were saying, if we don't go this, we're going to break everything down and stuff like that. And there isn't that kind of thing. It's not in that atmosphere that we're doing it. So, we're doing the work and we're going on. I think what is very clear to me already at this stage is there will be a change to the electoral system because you can't do everything that needs to be done within the current electoral system. And I'm guided by much of what Comrade Mavivi has said, the principles that were taken into account when the electoral system was determined in 1993, that those principles must more or less remain intact. I don't know if there's anything in particular, Chair, that you would like me to comment on other than those general comments.
No, thank you. No, thank you very much, Comrade Valley. I think that's very adequate, and I think it's enough to indicate what kind of process that's underway, but also what are the constraints it has. I think in the concluding remarks, I think perhaps I hope our respondents will not take this unkindly. I'm not returning to them deliberately. I'm looking forward to us engaging their inputs, but also engaging with them in some of the platforms that I think are necessary, given that this is not just a matter of only the ANC to deal with. Of course, yes, the ANC, there's a lot expected of it in terms of the leadership to be given. I think the well-being of our democracy is a subject of concern to everybody. And at a point, this issue of the adequacy or lack of adequacy of the electoral system as we have is going to be a matter that society should be all engaged in. I really want to add to Comrade Andres's very correct appreciation of the insights. Very clearly, the issues are about accountability. And I think a number of proposals that need to be considered as to how to enhance accountability, because accountability, it's also very clear that it is not necessarily to be achieved by just having a constituency-based system, because you do have already a full-blown constituency system in local government for which this accountability is still an issue. If there are also some comparative studies that have been done, I think it's going to be useful for us to reflect on those and find an appropriate balance between all the principles so that we can take an informed decision in that respect. I did say in the beginning that we are not hoping to have conclusion of this discussion here. This is merely a facilitation for further discussions that must take place as we are heading to the NGC. So again, I really want to thank our co-presenters, including our respondents, for preparing for this and making it such a useful kind of venture that we've been. I'm sure we are even better to deal with the matter in our respective structures, branches, finally, as we prepare for the NGC. Unless there's anything, Comrade Shanas and other Comrade Lowe, that you may want to bring to my attention, I think we are at the point where we could conclude this session of Umrabulo. Is there anything, perhaps announcements?
No, Chair. Thank you very much indeed. I think we can end it now. It's already 1:20, and we will issue some notifications later about the upcoming Umrabulo dialogues or roundtables.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much to everybody for making the time. It is an important time for the movement. I think it's important that we provide leadership on these matters. Thank you very much, one and all. The meeting is adjourned.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very, very much, Chair, and all participants.
Much appreciate. Thank you very much, Chair.